My name is Jordan, and I've always been the quiet type, the kind of kid who'd rather sit in a corner with a book than run around yelling for attention. Growing up, I liked my own space, my own thoughts. But that didn't mean I got to keep them. Not with Lucas around. My younger brother was everything I wasn't. Loud, brash, and the golden child in our mother's eyes. Margaret, Mom, saw him as her little prince. The one who could do no wrong. Me? I was just the older one, expected to take it all in stride. And for a long time, I did. Lucas had a way of making my life hell from the moment he could walk. It started small, knocking over my toy cars, scribbling on my drawings with those chubby little hands. I'd complain, and Mom would laugh it off, saying, "Oh, Jordan, he's just playing with you." Playing. That's what she called it when he'd snatch my snacks or shove me out of the way to get to the TV first. By the time we hit grade school, it wasn't so innocent anymore. He'd mock me in front of his friends, calling me the weirdo because I didn't talk much. Once he even tried to push me down the stairs, just for a laugh, he said later. I caught the railing in time, heart pounding, but when I told Mom, she brushed it off. "Boys will be boys," she said, ruffling his hair. "It's just brotherly love." Dad, James, wasn't around much to see it. He worked long hours, coming home late with tired eyes and a voice too worn out to argue. I don't blame him for not noticing. Lucas saved his worst for when Dad wasn't there, and Mom's excuses filled the gaps. For years, I took it. I kept my head down, stayed out of his way, and let the resentment simmer quietly inside me. What else could I do? I was skinny back then, shorter than Lucas despite being 2 years older. He had this wild energy I couldn't match, and he knew it. That changed when I was 14. One evening, Dad came home earlier than usual. I was in my room, nursing a bruised elbow from where Lucas had accidentally shoved me into the wall. I didn't plan to say anything. Complaining never worked, but Dad saw me rubbing it and frowned. "What happened?" he asked, his voice sharp in a way I hadn't heard before. I hesitated, then mumbled the truth. For once, Mom wasn't there to interrupt with her usual defense. Dad's jaw tightened. He didn't yell or make a scene. Instead, he just said, "Come with me tomorrow." The next day, he took me to a local taekwondo class. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe I thought it'd be like those kung fu movies where kids turn into heroes overnight. It wasn't. The room smelled of sweat and rubber mats, and the instructor barked orders I could barely follow. My first kick was clumsy, barely lifting off the ground, and I stumbled. But Dad stayed, watching from the sidelines with his arms crossed. "Keep going," he said when I looked at him, unsure. So I did. For the next 2 years, I went back. 3 times a week, I'd pull on that white uniform, tie the belt, and step onto the mat. It wasn't just about the moves, the high kicks, the blocks, the precise stances. It was about what it did to me. I grew taller, my shoulders broadened, and my arms filled out with muscle I didn't know I could build. More than that, I learned control. How to breathe through anger. How to channel it into something sharp and deliberate. Lucas noticed, too. He'd still smirk or throw out a jab like "nice pajamas, loser" when I left for practice, but he didn't get in my face as much. I think he sensed I wasn't the same kid he could push around anymore. Then came the day it all shifted. I was 16, sitting at the kitchen table, counting the cash I'd saved from mowing lawns, money I'd stashed in a tin box under my bed. Lucas swaggered in, his eyes lighting up when he saw the bills. "What's that for, huh?" he said, reaching for it. I pulled the box back, but he lunged, grabbing at my wrist. "Come on, Jordan, don't be stingy. Share with your little bro." His grin was all teeth, like this was just another game. Something snapped. I stood up, taller than him now, and yanked my arm free. He laughed, stepping closer, thinking he could still intimidate me. "What, you gonna cry about it?" he taunted, reaching for the box again. I didn't think, just reacted. all those hours on the mat kicked in. I pivoted, planted my left foot, and snapped a defensive roundhouse with my right. The sole of my foot caught him square in the chest, not hard enough to break anything, just enough to send a message. He staggered back, eyes wide, and landed on his ass against the counter. For a second, we both froze. The kitchen was silent except for his sharp breaths. I lowered my leg, steadying myself, my heart hammering, but my voice calm. "Don't touch my stuff again," I said. He didn't answer, just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then he scrambled up, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out. Mom wasn't home that day, thank God, or I'd have gotten an earful about being too rough with her precious boy. Dad found out later, though. He didn't say much, just nodded when I told him, a flicker of pride in his eyes. Lucas never tried anything physical after that. He kept his distance, switching to snide comments and dirty looks instead of fists. It wasn't peace, not really, but it was something. A line had been drawn, and for once, I was the one holding it. Looking back, that kick didn't just push Lucas away, it pulled me out of the shadows I'd been hiding in. Taekwondo gave me more than strength. It gave me a voice I didn't know I had. But even then, I couldn't have guessed how deep the cracks in our family ran, or how much worse they'd get. Life has a way of moving faster than you expect, like a sparring match where you're still finding your footing when the first kick lands. By the time I hit 19, I was out of high school and stepping into college, a small state university a few hours from home. It wasn't some grand escape from Lucas or Mom's coddling, just a chance to breathe in a space that wasn't already marked by their shadows. I kept up with Taekwondo, finding a dojo near campus where I could lose myself in the rhythm of kicks and blocks. It was my anchor, the one thing that stayed steady. That's where I met Sarah. She was in my Intro to Psychology class, always sitting near the front with a notebook full of neat looping handwriting. She had this energy, bright, loud in a way that didn't grate on me like Lucas's noise did. Her laugh carried across the room, and her eyes caught mine one day when I fumbled my pen. "Need a spare?" she asked, tossing me one with a grin. I caught it, nodded a thanks, and that was it, the start of something I didn't see coming. We got close fast. Study sessions turned into coffee runs, then late-night talks on the dorm steps. She liked my quietness, said it balanced her out. I liked how she didn't push me to be someone I wasn't. 6 months in, she told me she was pregnant. It wasn't planned. Hell, we were barely adults ourselves. But there it was, a curveball neither of us could dodge. I didn't hesitate long. "We'll figure it out," I told her. And a month later, we were married in a courthouse with mismatched rings and a handful of witnesses. Our son, Noah, came screaming into the world not long after. Marriage wasn't easy. We moved into a cramped apartment off campus, juggling classes and diaper changes. I took a part-time job at a hardware store to cover bills, and Sarah stayed home with Noah when she wasn't in lectures. At first, it felt like we were building something. Fragile, sure, but ours. Taekwondo kept me sane through it all. 3 nights a week, I'd slip away to the dojo, trading the chaos of crying babies and late rent for the sharp focus of a spinning kick. The mat was my refuge, a place where I could breathe without feeling the weight of everything else. But cracks showed up fast. 2 years in, I caught Sarah texting someone late at night. Some guy from her study group, she said. She swore it was nothing, just flirting that got out of hand, and I believed her because I wanted to. Noah was toddling around by then, all big eyes and messy hair, and I couldn't imagine breaking that for him, so I let it go. Then it happened again a year later. This time, a co-worker she'd met at a temp job. She cried, said she was sorry, that she felt trapped being so young with a kid. I forgave her again, though it stung deeper. For Noah, I told myself, and I'd head to the dojo after, pouring the hurt into every punch and kick until my muscles ached. Taekwondo wasn't just about blowing off steam anymore. It was teaching me something. Patience, for one. The instructors drilled it into us. Control your strikes, your breathing, your mind. Don't lash out wild. Make every move count. It stuck with me. I'd come home from practice, sweaty and spent, and sit with Noah while he played with his blocks, letting the calm settle over me. I started dreaming of something better, a steady job after graduation, a house maybe, a life where Sarah and I could stop stumbling over each other's mistakes. Lucas was still around, though not as much. He'd gone off to college too, closer to home, and I only saw him on holidays when I dragged Sarah and Noah back to visit. He'd mellowed some, no more shoving or stealing, just the occasional smirk and a jab about my Karate Kid routine. "Still kicking air, huh?" he'd say, and I'd shrug it off. Mom still doted on him, slipping him cash when she thought I wasn't looking, while Dad gave me quiet nods like he approved of the distance I'd carved out. It wasn't perfect, but it was bearable. Then came the night that tilted everything sideways. Noah was 4, asleep in his little bed with the dinosaur sheets. Sarah and I were on the couch, a rare, quiet moment after a long day. She'd been off lately, distracted, jumping when her phone buzzed. I didn't push it, figuring it was stress from her new waitressing gig. But that night, she turned to me, her face pale, hands twisting in her lap. "Jordan," she said, her voice small, "I need to tell you something." I set my beer down, a knot forming in my gut. "What is it?" I asked, keeping my tone even, the way I'd learned to steady myself before a sparring match. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Before we got married, there was someone else, just for a little while. I didn't think it mattered, but..." She swallowed hard, and the room felt too small, the air too thick. "It was Lucas." The name hit me like a jab I didn't see coming. Lucas, my brother, the one who'd spent years making me feel less than nothing. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but she just sat there, eyes glassy. "It was before we were serious," she rushed on. "Before Noah. I ended it, I swear. I thought you should know." My mind spun, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. I could feel my pulse in my throat, steady but loud, like the thud of my foot against a pad. "Before Noah." That's what she said. So maybe it was just a stupid fling, a mistake from years ago. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. "Okay," I said finally, my voice flat. "Thanks for telling me." She nodded, relief flickering across her face, and we didn't talk about it again that night. But as I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, something gnawed at me, a quiet doubt I couldn't kick away. Taekwondo had taught me to trust my instincts, to sense when an opponent was holding back. And Sarah, she wasn't telling me everything. I didn't know it then, but that confession was just the first crack in a wall about to come crashing down. Sarah's confession lingered in my head like a bruise that wouldn't fade. For days, I carried it around, replaying her words. It was Lucas, before Noah, trying to convince myself it was ancient history. I didn't ask questions, didn't press her. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find if I dug deeper. Instead, I went to the dojo, threw myself into drills until my legs burned and my mind went quiet. Taekwondo had always been my reset button, a way to drown out the noise. But this time, the noise wouldn't stop. It came to a head a week later. Noah was at a friend's place for a play date, leaving Sarah and me alone in the apartment. She'd been edgy all day, snapping over spilled coffee, pacing like she couldn't sit still. I was folding laundry, trying to keep things normal, when she blurted it out. "Jordan, we need to talk." I set the shirt down, my hands steady but my chest tightening. "Okay," I said, voice calm, the way I'd talk myself through a sparring stance. "What's going on?" She stood by the window, arms crossed, staring at the floor. "I wasn't honest with you," she said, barely above a whisper. "About Lucas. It didn't end before we got married." The air shifted, heavy and suffocating. I didn't move, didn't blink. Just waited, like I was sizing up an opponent. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Her eyes flicked up, wet and guilty. "It kept going, after we were together. Even after Noah was born. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." She took a shaky breath. "And there's more." My pulse hammered, but I held still. "Say it." "Noah." Her voice broke. "He's not yours. He's Lucas's." It was like taking a kick to the face in the ring. Everything exploded. My vision blurred. A sharp pain shot through my skull, and the world tilted hard. I could feel it. The sting radiating from my nose to my temples, the dizzy spin of my head, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that wouldn't quit. I'd taken hits in practice before, misjudged blocks that left me reeling, but this was worse. This wasn't a mat I could roll off. This was my life, shattering in front of me, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe through the chaos of it. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, while the room swayed. Sarah was saying something, apologies, excuses, I don't know, but it was just static against the noise in my head. Lucas, my brother, the kid who'd tormented me since we were kids, who'd taken every chance to grind me down. And Sarah, the one I'd built a family with, the one I'd forgiven twice before. They'd done this together, behind my back, and Noah, the boy I'd rocked to sleep, taught to kick a ball, wasn't even mine. Somehow I found my voice. "When?" It came out low, rough, like I'd been shouting for hours. She flinched. "It started before the wedding, stopped for a while, then picked back up. The last time was a year ago. I swear it's over now." A year ago? Noah was 3 then. I'd been working doubles at the store, coming home exhausted while they... What? Snuck around? Laughed at me? The pain in my head sharpened, but I forced it down, the way I'd push through a sparring round. "You're sure he's not mine?" I asked, needing to hear it again. She nodded, tears spilling over. "I did a test. I'm so sorry, Jordan." Sorry didn't mean anything. I turned away, grabbed my keys from the counter, and started shoving clothes into a bag. My hands moved on autopilot, socks, shirts, whatever I could reach. Sarah stepped closer, voice trembling. "Please don't go. We can figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," I said, not looking at her. "We're done." The words felt final, like a door slamming shut. I zipped the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out. She didn't follow. I drove to Dad's place that night, an hour away. He was in the garage when I pulled up, tinkering with an old radio. One look at my face, and he set his tools down. "What happened?" he asked, straight to the point. I told him everything. Sarah, Lucas, Noah. My voice stayed even, but my fists clenched at my sides. Dad listened, his expression hardening with every word. When I finished, he didn't say much, just put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "Stay here tonight," he said. "We'll deal with this." The next day, he called Lucas. I wasn't there for it, but Dad told me later. He didn't yell, just laid it out cold. Lucas was out of the family, out of the will. "You get $1, Dad said, rewriting it that night. "That's all you're worth to me now." Mom tried to argue, her voice rising about forgiveness and mistakes, but Dad shut her down. "He betrayed his brother," he snapped. "That's not a mistake. That's a choice." I filed for divorce the next morning, the paperwork cold and clinical compared to the mess inside me. Lucas showed up at Dad's a few days later, banging on the door, his face red and desperate. "Jordan, come on, man, let's talk," he pleaded through the screen. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I stepped outside, staring him down. He looked smaller than I remembered, not the cocky kid who'd pushed me around, just a guy scrambling for excuses. "You didn't mean it?" I said, my voice steady. "You slept with my wife. You let me raise your kid. Get out of here, Lucas. I've got nothing left for you." He opened his mouth, then shut it, backing off when he saw I wasn't budging. I watched him go, then drove to the dojo. The place was empty that night. Just me, the mats, and a heavy bag in the corner. I wrapped my hands, squared up, and let loose. A high kick, hard and clean, right into the center. The impact jolted up my leg, sharp and grounding. I kept going, one strike after another, until my breath steadied and the ringing in my ears finally dulled. That kick to the face had knocked me flat, but I wasn't staying down. Not for them, not for anyone. The weeks after I walked out on Sarah blurred together, a haze of paperwork and quiet nights at Dad's place. Divorce doesn't feel like freedom at first. It's more like stepping off a cliff and waiting to hit the ground. But I didn't sit still long enough to let it sink in. I moved out, found a one-bedroom apartment near work, and threw myself into routine. Days at the hardware store stretched into overtime, and nights at the dojo became my lifeline. Taekwondo wasn't just a habit anymore. It was the thread holding me together when everything else unraveled. Lucas didn't take Dad's decision lying down, but it didn't matter. Without the family's support, Mom's handouts, Dad's quiet backing, he floundered. I heard through the grapevine he'd dropped out of college, unable to pay tuition after Dad cut him off. Last I knew, he'd taken a job as a mechanic, greasy hands in a rented room somewhere with Sarah and Noah. They were together now, raising the kid I'd once thought was mine. I didn't ask for details, didn't want them. Relatives stopped mentioning him at gatherings, their whispers fading into awkward silences when I walked in. He'd burned every bridge but Mom's, and even that was shaky. She couldn't let him go, though. A few months after the fallout, I caught her on the phone with him, her voice low and urgent. "Just hang in there, sweetie," she was saying when I walked into Dad's kitchen. She hung up fast, but the guilt was all over her face. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. Dad heard it too, and that night, their argument echoed through the house. "If you keep this up, Margaret, I'm done," he said, his tone flat, but final. I don't know if she stopped after that. I didn't stick around to find out. Home wasn't home anymore, not with her still clinging to the son who'd stabbed me in the back. Work became my focus. I'd always been reliable, but now I pushed harder, taking extra shifts, volunteering for projects no one else wanted. 6 months in, the manager called me into his office. "You've got a head for this," he said, sliding a promotion letter across the desk. More pay, more responsibility. I took it, not for the money, though that helped, but for the purpose. It was something to build on, a corner of my life I could control. The real rebuilding, though, happened off the clock. I started seeing a therapist, a guy named Mark who didn't sugarcoat things. "You're carrying a lot," he said in our first session, tapping his pen against a notepad. "Anger, grief, betrayal. You've got to let it out somewhere." I told him about Taekwondo, how I'd been hitting the bag harder lately, imagining faces I'd never name out loud. He nodded. "That's a start. Keep going." So I did. The dojo became my church. Sweat instead of sermons, kicks instead of prayers. I'd step onto the mat, bow to the instructor, and let the world fall away. Every strike was deliberate, every form a release. I wasn't the scrawny kid Lucas used to shove around anymore, and I sure as hell wasn't the husband who'd let Sarah's lies slide. I was stronger now. Physically, yes, but more than that. Taekwondo had taught me discipline, the kind that kept me from breaking when I wanted to. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me a way to carry it. Lucas tried reaching out once, about a year after I'd left. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, looking thinner, his eyes shadowed. "Jordan," he said through the cracked door, "I messed up. I know I did. Can we just talk?" His voice had that old charm, the one he'd used to wriggle out of trouble as a kid. But I wasn't a kid anymore. "No," I said, keeping the chain on the door. You don't get to walk back in here like nothing happened. You made your choices. Live with them. He stood there, mouth half open, then nodded and shuffled off. I watched him disappear down the stairs, a flicker of something, regret maybe, stirring in my chest. But I shut it down. He wasn't my brother anymore. That tie had snapped the moment I'd learned about Noah. Noah. That was the part I couldn't shake. I'd see kids his age at the park sometimes, 5 now, all energy and gap-toothed smiles, and wonder what he was like. Did he have Lucas's temper? Sarah's laugh? I'd never know. Cutting him out hurt more than leaving her, but staying wasn't an option. He wasn't mine, not by blood, not by right. I'd been a placeholder, nothing more, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. Time moved on, though, and so did I. The promotion turned into a steady gig. The apartment started feeling like mine. I'd cook dinner, nothing fancy, just enough to fill the silence, and sit by the window, watching the city lights blink on. Nights at the dojo stretched late, my belt darkening with every test I passed. I wasn't running from the past anymore. I was stepping past it, one kick at a time. One evening, I stood in the dojo after a grueling session, the room empty except for the hum of the overhead lights. My knuckles were raw from the bag, my legs steady despite the ache. I lined up for one last move, a spinning heel kick, high and clean. The air snapped as my foot connected, the sound sharp and final. I held the stance, breathing hard, and let my eyes drift to the mirror across the room. The man staring back wasn't the boy Lucas had bullied, or the husband Sarah had betrayed. He was me, Jordan, scarred, sure, but standing tall. Lucas and Sarah were out there somewhere, scraping by, their lives a tangle I'd never unravel. Mom might still sneak him cash. Dad might still draw lines she'd cross. I didn't know, and I didn't care to. They were shadows now, fading with every step I took forward. The hurt lingered, an ache deep in my bones, like a bruise from a fight I'd won but couldn't forget. Maybe it'd always be there, maybe that was okay. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And as I bowed out of the dojo that night, I knew one thing for sure. I'd keep fighting, not for them, but for me. And that's my story, or at least, where it stands for now. From the kid who couldn't stand up to his little brother, to the man who walked away from a life built on lies, it's been a hell of a ride. I've laid it all out here. The resentment, the betrayal, the slow climb back to something solid. Taekwondo gave me the strength to keep going, but putting this down for you to hear, that's a different kind of kick. So, what do you think? Did it hit you hard, like that moment I realized Noah wasn't mine? Or maybe you've got your own take on Lucas, Sarah, or even how I handled it all. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Tell me what stood out, what you'd have done differently, or if you've got a story of your own that echoes mine. Every voice counts, and I'm listening. If you liked this journey, if it kept you hooked from that first defensive kick to the last one in the dojo, hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from, and I'd hate for you to miss it. Thanks for sticking with me through the bruises and the rebounds. Until next time, keep fighting your own fights, whatever they look like.